Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody in Europe. Good afternoon for participants here in China. This is Martina Gerst speaking out of the EUSME Center in Beijing with today's topic, which is about product safety and conformity assessment for consumer products in China. Before we start, we would like to update you on some of our just recent services. One of them is, for example, new publications in the areas of, for example, the ICT market, which has been updated recently, the food and beverage market, but also the construction sector report. Besides that, you find many more guidelines and reports which are to be updated soon. Another very important and interesting function you can use if you are registered at the EUSME Center is the Ask the Expert button. Here we help you with support, for example, verify your business partner. You can get help for distributor and agent search, or we also give guidance in terms of market access. So partly what we will discuss today, you also can use the Ask the Expert button and being connected then with one of our experts in the areas of business development, legal, or market access. Another thing which is also quite new is the online calendar, where you can see upcoming trainings in your region. This can be checked regularly, and it's regularly updated with, for example, how to sell food and beverage products online in China, or, for example, also how to start your business in China, online or a real one. So to come to the practical things of today's, if you want to participate in this webinar and you have a question, you see here the screen which is like red and the big red arrow, so where you can write your comments, and then one of our colleagues will scribble down your question, which will be answered at the end of this today's session. And I'm sure there will be questions. I already have one for myself. So we are very lucky to have today's speaker, Mr. Klaus Ziegler, who has a good, like more than 20 years of professional experience in conformity and standards in the area of trade with China. He is the president of a company that is called Quality Partnerships, based here in Beijing. Down you find the web address and his email. But he is also representing the German standardization organization DIN here in China. Before, he worked in a number of different assignments, for example, working as a country manager in Japan for the big testing and inspection company SGS. And he is continuously involved in various projects here in terms of quality and standardization, and of course also of product safety of consumer products, which is the topic of today. So, Klaus, what do you want to, tell us today, or what do you want to give us an overview today?
Yeah, Martina, thanks for the mic. Today, I will talk a little bit about the market for consumer products in China. And then we go into a bit more technical issues. I will explain the regulatory framework in China behind this. Then I'll talk about the main elements of product safety. And then we go into a practical guidance for SMEs, how to navigate the Chinese systems. We'll then at the end repeat the key points and come to the conclusions.
Okay, so let's start. I did see it's heavily loaded, so five really big things. Product safety in China, I mean, why is this important for, like, not only for China, I think, but also for European SMEs?
Yes, many product safety in China does not have really the best reputation. There are so many scandals around. We had the food safety scandals, we had toy safety scandals, and so on. But nevertheless, China has a quite comprehensive system for product safety, well developed, well established, with also all the controls in and checks in place. There is a ministry which is in charge for quality and safety, and there also is a structure in charge of probably 1 million or more inspectors checking upon the product safety in China. Now you can ask me, what are the results of this system? And I would say it's mixed. In part it works, in part it doesn't work. And it affects certainly everybody who produces in China, but also people who import to China or export from Europe, but also it affects consumers in Europe, because if the product safety net system doesn't work in China, it will also affect Europe. And we have many products in Europe which have been found, unfortunately, to be not fully in compliance with legislation, and they are a part of these are from China, and so this system in China and the systems in Europe interrelate.
This brings us to the next slide, which is quite important. Here we are talking about the market for consumer products in China. So to give us an overview, what can we find here?
The market is huge in China. I mean, China has a domestic market today, probably of 500 million consumers. It's fast growing. Even every day, more consumers are joining the classes which really can buy consumer goods, which are participating in the markets. So it's worth thinking about China, although it's a difficult market, it's not easy to access, but it's a market which is huge, which is interesting, and it's also very different. What China has proven, that Chinese consumers have a taste for luxury products, so it's for many luxury good producers, it's probably the prime market for sales. But it also is a market which is very price sensitive. It's a market which is full of fakes, and also Chinese consumers, they unknowingly buying fakes. So you have also this. What is interesting for us Europeans is that Chinese like very much the Western lifestyle. That's what they're buying often with European consumer products. They are interested in design of our products, and also they believe that European products have a high level of safety.
Okay, so this brings us to our first poll question to make it a bit more interactive. So the poll question here, we would like to ask the audience, do you think that a market access in China is improving or getting more difficult in the last 2 years? So I will launch this question now. And here you have 4 different options. One is where you could decide whether you think it has improved or it's more difficult, there is no change, or there is it's not a real issue. So we would be very grateful if you have to some extent some experience, if you can vote, and then so that we can get an impression of the audience today who is listening, and then probably might stress then one or the other aspect more. Okay, I see. Let's see. So, and I think
the result is mixed.
The result is mixed. Yes, this is what we can say from an overview. So I would say let's close it, because probably we have most of the attendees have voted. So I will close it, and let's share the results with everyone. I do hope I can see the slide now, but they see the results anyway. So obviously most of the audience today thinks that things have improved. So basically 50% thinks it has improved, whereas like 35% still think it's even more difficult, or like 13% say there is no change. So Klaus, from your experience, what would you say, since you are since a while here in China? What
This result is no surprise to me, because it's really like this. China is trying to, let's say, strengthen, but also um, to simplify the regulatory system, also to, in one way, to ease access for consumers. On the other hand, there is also tendency to over-regulate a lot of things, making access more difficult. So it's really, you have both tendencies. You have a simplification, but you also have the tendency that things become more complicated. And that's exactly shown in these results.
Okay, so
But the Chinese market is a little bit peculiar, and there are things you have to consider if you want to enter this market. One is certainly that the assumption of Chinese consumers regarding consumer products are not identical with the assumption a European consumer has. And this has to be taken into, has to really taken care of. What is certainly different is the language, so it means manuals, displays, logos, and so on, all have to be adjusted to the Chinese language and the needs of Chinese consumers. The tastes are different, the standards are different, the market access regulations are different. You have issues of IP and design protection, which also not 100% the same system as we have in Europe. You have issues about compliance in China, and you have certainly the customs regulations. So there's a whole lot of things you have to take care of if you want to export to China.
is there a particular example you have to say you could think of, which you could mention here?
Just a simple thing. If you want to export textiles to China, for example, in the luxury area, a lot of textiles are exported to China. Then you have to, first of all, you have to consider the labels are different. They have to be in Chinese and the different regulations, a different type of content. You have to undertake testing, although you believe that your goods are tested already, your textiles, you have to test them again in China because the standards are different, the compliance requirements are different, and you have to consider the rules for composition of textiles, which are different than in Europe.
Okay, so this was one aspect of things that have to be considered. What else?
Then you have also some, let's say, more technical issues. You have, in China is a huge country, and it's actually not a one single market. It's actually split in many regional markets. It depends foremost on geography, climate, culture, but you also have the provincial power. They can really have their own regulation to a certain degree. You have the local administration, which have different interpretation of the law to a certain degree. So you have, and on top of this, the market surveillance is totally localized in China. So you have to deal with many provinces with different climates, different cultures, which makes it a bit more complicated to access the market.
And in terms of, that's the regional difference aspect of it, but none in terms of consumers. I mean, do they have something like consumer organizations, or what is, how does it work here in China actually?
You have these things in China. It's a bit different organized to Europe. You don't have independent organizations, but you have structures in place protecting consumers. You have social networks, you have the internet where consumers really express their opinion about products and about companies and services. You have broadcasting, you have radio stations, and many radio and TV stations in China. And for them, issues with consumer products are as interesting as they are in Europe. So there are ways for consumers to express themselves, and it's heard and it's taken into account.
Yeah, and then of course we have in the past we had webinars also on the social networks which are used here, like Weibo and Weixin, which are very quickly distributing good and bad news, and which are used now actually as real good marketing tools of companies.
I would like to come back to one point, these regional differences, just to show how important it is. I had an issue once with one client that was about power adapters. Power adapters for all kind of electrical equipment. These power adapters can be tested also for certain height where they're used, whether they're used on sea level, they're used in the mountains or in the high mountains. And now in China, regulations distinguish between below 2,000 meters and above 2,000 meters. Below 2,000 meters is pretty common. This is basically the flat areas. But now above 2,000 meters, unlike Europe, you have a lot of consumers in China living above 3,000 or even above 4,000 meter height. So the requirements are you have to test it in as it would be on 5,000 meter altitude. You don't do such testing in Europe. So there you have already a big difference based on climate.
Okay. So this is a bit of an introduction, or was a bit of an introduction into the whole thing. Now we move on to the regulatory framework, and this is special and interesting here. So key points, Klaus, you would like that our audience could take away from today?
I don't want to delve too much in the regulatory environment. I think it's quite complicated. Also, if you're not a lawyer, probably a little bit boring issue. But what you have to understand that the system is a bit different. In Europe, you have all these safety, product safety related directives and regulations, which are specific on product category or horizontal on certain issues. You have a toy directive, you have an EMC directive, you have a low voltage directive and so on. You don't have these things in China. On the other hand, you have a comprehensive product safety law which covers all products, no matter whether it's a consumer product or it's a B2B product, which contains all the rules which basically that the products have to be safe and so on. I will come back to that. Below that, you have very few regulations which are very specific, but not such thing like the European system. What then comes is below that, and that's much more important, are then the compulsory standards, which then really define what has to be done to keep products safe. We don't have that in Europe. We have the harmonized standard in Europe, which give a presumption of conformity, but it's not a must. In China, it's different. You have the compulsory standards. You have to comply with them. Besides them, you have also certainly the voluntary standards.
Okay, so but this now was one dimension of the whole regulatory framework. Here comes now another one. So we are talking about this organization some of you might have come across, which is called AQSIQ.
Yeah, it's like very interesting in China that you have one administration which is in charge for quality and product safety. This is something we don't have in Europe, and I think it's kind of it came from the Soviet influence 30, 40 years ago in China that such a ministry exists. Today you would think that such a thing belongs to a part of industrial policies or whatever, but no, in China you have a distinctive ministry for quality. And this ministry does everything. It makes the rules, it makes the standards, it inspects it, it tests it, it supervises, it issues the certificates, it's all in one. So it's the one ministry in charge for quality control and product safety in China.
Wow, I'm really impressed. So I would like to pick out one. I mean, this is just the organizational or the sketch of the organizational organizations involved here in China. Another important part, the SAC, the Standards Administration of China, where I would like where we would like to introduce you a little bit how standards are made actually, or if there is a hierarchy, Klaus, what is it? What does it look like?
Actually, China the Standard Administration of China, which I mentioned before, this is a supervisory body. This controls the standards and registers them, make sure they're in line with international standards. But on the other hand, you have a system of more than 70 standard bodies in China making standards, which are linked to different ministries, associations, research institutions, and so on. So this is quite a complex system, which then leads to a hierarchy where you have above a few technical regulations, then the compulsory national standards, and beyond that, the compulsory conformity assessment rules. So this is the way, the part which is which you have to comply with, and then the voluntary standards, which are then at different levels and different. It's national. You have sector standards. You have certification testing schemes. Mm-hmm. What I have to say here, this system is changing. At the moment, you still have also compulsory so-called industry sector standards, but these are being phased out within the next 4 or 5 years, so they will disappear. That's why I haven't listed them here anymore, but they still exist, they're still relevant.
Mm-hmm. So why do you think China is changing its strategy?
China has realized that the system is too complicated, too complex to meet the needs of a modern high-tech industry and of the, let's say, of the place in the world economy China wants to be. So they simplified the system, a modernized system. It's an enormous work. Over 20,000 standards will have to be revised just for this new structure of the system that's ongoing. So many standards, compulsory and voluntary, will change in the next few years. Mm.
So do you think, will this be like beneficial to European SMEs, or will this be a challenge, or what do you think from your experience?
Definitely be beneficial. This is really something, the system becomes more international, it becomes more compatible also with the European standard system. It will also be easier to understand and handle. This is certainly a big improvement.
Okay, so let's come. Let's come to our second poll question. So, what do you think? Where would you search if you would like to find Chinese standards? So let's see. For example, you would like to export for the Chinese market, and so where would you try to find the respective standards? So we have here, I think it's 4 or 5 options for. So you would like to check the internet. You would probably have somebody in your company, or there is a business partner like a distributor, or maybe a consultant who could help you. Oh, okay. Let's see. The internet search is in favor. And relevant portals.
That's an interesting
yes.
result.
Yes, but
because
it's not closed.
How do you want to search in internet? It's all in Chinese. The Chinese standards are basically not available in English. So this is very surprising that people start with internet.
Let's close and share it with the audience. Okay. Here, what you can see now, the top is like internet search, but I do think, if you are in Europe, of course, you might have access to all sites overall. If you are based in China, it gets a bit difficult. So most people would check over the internet what they can find. Then, of course, the next one is like to really check relevant portals. Here you have mentioned the EU-China standards thing. Are there other portals where somebody could check?
Several countries have such portals. And the American side has one with China, but also some of the European member states. There's a German-Chinese portal, there is a British-Chinese, a French-Chinese portal. So on all these portals you can find standards, relevant standards. None of them is a complete collection, but they all have parts. Now, what I would say to this, that if I would have to pick here, I would first of all certainly start, if I have company staff in China, I would ask them. Then I think to ask the distributor about the relevant standard, that's certainly a reliable source. Internet search, as I said, is very difficult for language issues, and the translation you find on the internet of Chinese standards, they're highly unreliable because there are no official English translations. So somebody has translated and just put it in the internet, and you don't know whether it's correct. You don't know whether it's an outdated standard, whether it's a relevant version. So be very, very careful with internet search on Chinese standards.
Yeah.
So what you have is the portals. If you cannot find the portals, you really have to go to a consultant to help you. And a lot of companies do that actually.
This is a very valid point Klaus just mentioned. Even though you remember all the different organizations like SAC or AQSIQ, even though they have an English website, very often the content is not the same than on the Chinese website. Because of course, I mean, we are here in China, the official language is Mandarin or Chinese. So the most updated information usually is in Chinese only. And the English websites of the Chinese content is very often outdated. So this brings us now to what we are talking today about product safety law. So Klaus, can you give us maybe a bit of an overview to get an idea if, for example, I have a teddy bear I would like to sell. So if I start to look into the whole topic, so what does it mean if I would like to export this teddy bear to China?
Whatever product you export to China, it will most likely fall under the product safety law. The product safety law, the regulations are very similar to what applies in Europe in different national product safety laws, but also in the Consumer Product Safety Directive. Similar tools are in there. So that's basically what you have to live with. So it basically says you are responsible that the product is safe, is no threat to health, doesn't damage the environment, doesn't do harm to property, and so on. These type of rules are written in this law, but also it has some requirements about the product declaration, the product documentation. It includes also the shared responsibility of producers and vendors. So it also addresses the entire supply chain. And finally, what you see on this slide, it also requires warning marks. It has some issues about compensation for damage caused to defective products. It contains penalties for violators of the product safety, and it also says clearly that to make fakes is forbidden.
And hopefully then, there are fines and penalties for the violators of this.
Yes.
So this brings us to the main elements of the system for product safety. So talking about this, what are like the pillars of this system, Klaus? The product safety system in China, how is it characterized? I mean, we already have heard about standards and certifications, but what is also part of this whole system?
You have a comprehensive system which starts with custom inspection, with administrative regulations. You have the compulsory standards, voluntary standards, and then you have all kinds of certification, compulsory certification, but even more so many voluntary certification schemes. You have licensing schemes, you have a comprehensive market surveillance in China, and finally you have something which doesn't even exist in Europe. You have also some export controls for products which are of particular concern, like toys. So this is quite a comprehensive system, and you have to deal with all these elements if you are exporting products to China.
Okay, one of our most favorite examples in terms of certifications is the China Compulsory certification Klaus brought today. And so overall, to give our audience a broad overview, what are the key components of this China compulsory certification?
It's actually a good example because this is the most comprehensive scheme. It covers a lot of over 150 product categories, so it's quite widely used for consumer products. This is called the CCC system, the China Compulsory Certification System. It has three main elements. The first is you need to have a documentation of your products, which will be checked. The second is you have a type testing, and the third is you have a visit of your factory by Chinese inspectors. So these three elements make them, if you pass these three elements, then you will be issued a certificate valid for 5 years. Now, there are many other of these systems, and we'll talk about them. But this is certainly the most important one. It applies especially for electrical and electronic products, but also many other product categories. And I think here we got a question.
Oh yes, yeah. Here we have a question. So somebody here from the audience is asking, what's the impact of the growing use of CCC marking for the China market access? Is there any?
Actually, first of all, I have to make a correction. The CCC is not really growing. There are some areas being added. Actually, the last expansion was for firefighting products. A lot of new firefighting products have been added. But it's not like that now every year you have 20 more product categories joining CCC. That's actually not the case. In fact, all those products which have lost relevance, like for example, black and white TV, which doesn't exist anymore, basically, they are being eliminated from the list. So it's quite, it's changing all the time, but the idea is not to have this being enlarged all the time. But the impact is huge. If your product falls on the CCC, you will have to do it. That means you have a lengthy process behind it before you can export. It's not so cheap, especially if you are some specific products, for example, designer lamps, where you probably sell a couple of hundred per year, then these type of certification become very expensive.
Yeah, so sometimes only one, because I mean there are single units, and it's quite difficult.
Basically, you cannot do it.
You mentioned a very valid point, and I see it in your slide here as well. You say ideally the whole process takes 90 days. Is this realistic? Is this a realistic time frame, or what are your experiences in that field?
90 days is when everything goes well. Now, soon the authorities have to ask some questions about your product, that the time counter starts again, and you have another 90 days. So that's really only indicative. Actually, it used to be until last year, the product process maybe 6 to 9 months. Now it has been shortened considerably. Now it's about 4 months for a full process. You can do it. That has changed the regulation. Also here, simplification of the regulation beginning of this year.
Okay, we have another quick question here. Is there CCC required for skincare products?
No, skincare products do not fall under CCC, but you have regulations about testing of the products, so some compulsory testing to undergo for the product, which you have to evidence when you import that you have done this testing.
Yeah, and this is a very good question actually, because this brings us to the next slide, where you can see licenses beyond the CCC actually, and there is one point here on this slide which says CFDA approbation for medical devices and pharmaceuticals. So CFDA is the authority here, the China Food and Drug Administration, and skincare product would fall, I would say, under cosmetics, and those products very clearly have to be registered in advance before they come to China. So yes, no, it doesn't need a CCC certificate, but it would need a registering at the CFDA. So Klaus, what are other licenses or labelings that are required usually?
You see here a whole list of products of licenses you can get. As I say, CFDA for medical devices, cosmetics, and pharmaceuticals, but you have also, for example, you have homologation of vehicles, you have a compulsory energy license, or one I want to point out is this MIT approval for radio signal emitting devices, SRC. Everything which is, almost every product which is emitting radio waves will need a license for this, a registration, and behind this is testing. So there's quite some. We have even more on the next slide here. You see, so for example, environmental sensitive products, or you have explosion protection like Cinex in China. So there are many of these type of registrations.
So what would you recommend? I mean, I just see a lot of abbreviations and for different sectors. So again, if to come back to find this required information, what would you do?
Yeah. First of all, be aware that this exists, and then you ask. First of all, you ask your distributor if possible. He will probably know what is needed. You can ask also your staff in China, and if not, then you probably have to ask a consultant to help you with this, to evaluate what kind of needs you have for registration in China.
Yeah, this actually is a very good point, because we got another question where I can just tell out of experience that it's quite helpful that you need consultancies and agents here, also with the required licenses, because here now somebody has asked here if food needs a CFDA certification, and this is actually a very good question, because some food groups really require licenses. The most recent one, but it is not very clear at that moment, will be infant formula. It looks like that from October 1st on, this has to be particularly registered with CFDA. Currently, in terms of food, special health food groups have to be registered there as well. For example, vitamins. There is a couple of other ranges. It also depends on what's the ingredients. So it's quite complicated. Other bits, particularly in food and beverage, are highly regulated in terms of sanitary certificates or other things you have to bring, like the manufacturer has to be inspected, like for meat, for example, or for dairy. So this brings us actually to the next slide, which explains a bit.
Can I come back shortly to the food issue? I mean, unlike for consumer goods, for German consumer goods, where you have the WTO agreement and basically you have international rules regulating the market, in food it's all on bilateral basis. So each country has with China an agreement what kind of food products can be sold mutually, and that changes also all the time. So I would say for processed food in general, it's not a problem, unless it's something China has is specifically keen of protecting, like rice and such areas. But for all fresh products, and especially for meat, you only can do it if there's a mutual agreement, and then you have to follow all the rules which are imposed for these kind of products.
Yeah. Okay, so market access basically has then two parts, right?
Yeah. Market access is basically, and that's very different mainly from Europe. You have the pre-market controls, CCC and all the licenses, and you have the post-market controls, which is then the inspection, the market surveillance. In Europe, we basically rely on the second part only. There are very few registration before you enter products in the market for very, very specific products. In general, I think 98% of products don't need any registrations.
Okay. Market restrictions. So we already have like put this a bit into context, where we said, okay, you need licenses, you need certificates. Other things you would like to mention in that field?
China is a country which loves catalogs, positive catalogs. And they say this and this and this and this can be done, or this and this and this cannot be done. And you have also catalogs of products for which importation is simply prohibited. I just make an example. What is prohibited is, for example, used medical devices. It's almost impossible to bring them in. You can do that for larger equipment, but under very, very complicated rules. Then you all have a lot of products, as we mentioned, which requires a certificate or special license. Then there are products which need an inspection certificate. For example, certain pressure vessels need an inspection certificate. Then you have products which need test certificates. There can be also a whole range of products where you cannot import. I just make an example. For example, a lot of products related to firefighting, fire defense will need a test certificate before they can be imported. Then some products need a general importation license, which is easy to get, but you need it and you have to apply in advance. And then there are the products which are not regulated, which doesn't help too much. If it's not regulated, you are kind of in a legal limbo in China. You don't really know whether it's legal or not in China. If it's regulated, if it's in a catalog, you know exactly what you have to do. If it's not regulated, you basically don't know what you have to do.
This is actually quite interesting on one hand, on the other hand a bit scary, because if we are talking about this, then we quickly enter the subject of non-compliance of products. So, I mean, what happens then and what are like consequences if my product for whatever reason is not compliant?
Yeah, well, this is something which is actually similar to Europe, and also the structure is similar. If a product is not compliant, for example, it doesn't have the certificate needed, or the label is not in line with the compulsory Chinese standards, then you risk, first and foremost, they're halted by customs. Then they might be investigated by CIQ, that's Technical Inspection Organization of the provinces. And if there's any concern about a product, so first it'll be quarantined. And that means you're in trouble. It will be expensive. You will have to make sure you have to bring evidence to take it out of quarantine in customs, which can be a lengthy and time-consuming process, and you really have to bring sufficient proof to convince the custom officials that your product is compliant.
And what else?
And in serious cases, you will be fined. Your product will be destroyed. That happens quite often. Or in better cases, it will be shipped back to you on your expenses.
Okay.
Now, what it means also, if you have products which have been quarantined, this can go beyond the product itself, because the authorities, AQSIQ and the local inspection organizations of AQSIQ, they make a grading of all importers, of all companies. And then if you get a bad rating of AQSIQ, it means you have even more trouble at customs for whatever you do.
So this means, like, for example, here on the slide, that you can get an increased inspection regime,
yes,
if your stuff arrives.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. And then maybe more administrative measures you probably were not aware of before.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And certainly there are lots of tools where the government has to ask for remedy of you. They can ask, as we mentioned, increase inspection regime. They can ask for change in your production process or your products. They can fine you, and they can also recall your production license or importation license. That means end of business.
Okay. Yeah. So and this I mean, brings us to the next point, like the practical guidance for SMEs, because of course we would like that to avoid that you come into trouble like this. So from your experience working with SMEs for quite a while, what is the approach if somebody considers to export to China?
Yeah, I think you have to have kind of a systematic concept to approach market access in China. First of all, you look at the catalog of prohibited or restricted goods. If it's in this catalog, then you have already quite big difficulties. Now, general consumer products usually do not fall on these categories, but there are some. I make another example. For example, used toys is impossible to import to China, whatever the reason is. Does product fall under the scope of the law of product quality? Generally, if you sell it, if it's commercial, yes, then it falls under this law. Then you have to think about what kind of compulsory certification apply, CCC, energy label, whatever. Then you look at the compulsory standards which apply, because they might be quite different from Europe. And finally, you also look at voluntary certification schemes. They are very popular in China. There are many of them. So it's often relevant to think about this voluntary certification scheme. Depends really what you want to demonstrate with that.
Okay.
And finally, there's a catalog of products for which are the import and export controls, where you need specific licenses. And then what always you have to consider is the product documentation I have compliant. And this is often not the case.
So if we're talking about products to make it more, how to say, more visible for the audience. So what are like big consumer product groups which need what? So I think we have here an example for electrical and electronic household products.
Yeah, I mean, there are some specific product categories which are of specific concern. Many categories of electrical and electronic household goods need CCC. Audio and video equipment, ICT equipment, handheld tools, and all kind of white goods here from they all fall under CCC. Then you have often the radio approval, SRC. Then you have, if you need to have it in explosion-proof area, then it's a CNEX scheme. And what is also relevant for these, and that's probably something which helps you, there is an international mutual recognition agreement for electrical goods under the IEC EE scheme. That's called the CB certification scheme. So if you want to have your test results in China recognized for CCC, you better get a CB certificate.
Okay. Are there any other similarities or differences to Europe?
Yes, the system is quite different. When in Europe we have, in general, the low voltage directive and the EMC directives regulating these markets. It's pure self-declaration in both cases. In China, it depends on the product category. Then you need a compulsory license like CCC. The underlying standards might also be different. So it might even require some changes in the product configuration or even in the essence, the structure of the company.
Another popular consumer good are toys. We already have mentioned this as an example. So what do you find here when you talk with when you talk about like toys or toys products, particularly for like children in a younger age?
The structure is quite different in Europe. In Europe, we have the Toys Directive again as a sectoral directive, which requires certain testing, which also says what standards you should comply with to have the presumption of conformity. But again, it's a self-declaration. Now in China, you split toys in toys requiring CCC, for example, electrical, plastic, metal toys, and other toys which do not require any license in China. And some which need some declarations like textile toys which need then the declaration for textiles.
Okay, and I think a third example which is very, very important here as well, as also in China everybody wants to save energy. There is what is called the compulsory energy label now. So where do we find this? What type of products here?
It's similar products than in Europe under the energy label. So it's also vehicles like refrigerators, washing machines, air conditioners, but also many other product categories in China. And this is fast growing, this list. Every year we add, China adds some products which fall under this compulsory energy label. Now, unlike CCC, this is a self-declaration. You have to do the testing in China, but then it's a self-declaration, and you just give your data to the authorities in charge every year, and then you're basically fine with that.
Okay. So since only 10 minutes are left, so what do you consider like key points European SMEs should take into consideration when navigating this system, which I have to say, if I would see it for the first time, I would be a bit lost because it's quite complex. It has different stakeholders. There are so many things which are not the same than in Europe. So any advice here from your side?
I mean, as you mentioned, there are so many elements. I think there are no other way than to fight yourself through all these elements, get familiar with these elements, and if you feel you're lost, get help. Get help from consultant. The first help you can get from the EUSME Center or similar, or from trade association and so on. That's, let's say, the first stage. But then you ask your distributors for help, and if you feel you're still not good enough, then go to a consultant. It's probably worth it, because if you make something wrong, your goods risk to be quarantined. Then what you always have to think, I mentioned that the proper documentation of the safety product according to Chinese standards, according to Chinese tests requirements, pay attention to details of documentation, and make sure that all the instructions are in Chinese, whatever, or everything, even the symbols are not 100% the same. If you have symbols on your product, warning symbols and safety symbols, make sure they comply with the Chinese regulations. Never ship a product before you have all licenses in place. That's a common mistake, and that's basically the worst you can do. If you ship product, make sure you have ensured that you have whatever is needed to have a smooth importation. The compulsory standards are the key to compliance. You have to know the compulsory standards in China, even if they're in Chinese, and you have to know the differences to IC standards or whatever, to international standards, or to the applicable EN standards. As a general rule, compliance in Europe does not imply compliance in China. That's, let's say, the most common mistake made. Even if you believe your product is in every way safe, it's in every way controlled, it doesn't mean you're compliant.
This is here I would like to add, particularly in the context that we have seen, we have a lot of pre-market approval things to do, where Klaus very correctly has mentioned, never ship a product before you have all licenses and certifications secured. This is particularly important in heavily regulated areas like medical devices, for example, where you also need either a business partner who is familiar with the whole system and the whole structure, who has then a network or agents who help him with the required licenses to get all these pre-market approvals. So it's sometimes quite specific, in a sector specific, and then subsector specific, what types of licenses are also required for really getting your product registered. It's not so easy actually from out of Europe to getting things done here in China, and you might seek then for help. For example, as Klaus mentioned, either like us, where we reply to questions, or basically direct you in the right point you to the right organizations, or you choose whatever service provider who helps you with that. This brings us basically to we already have replied to a couple of questions. Here, one question is about a very famous construct we have right now, which is the Shanghai Free Trade Zone. So somebody says, will companies be affected by changing regulations and developments in the free trade zone, for example?
Yes, certainly are. There are also regulations related to controls or inspection. The inspections regime is simplified, and one of the advantages you have in the Shanghai Free Trade Zone is that you can do basically when you bring in the goods to the free trade zone, there's usually no technical inspection, so you don't need all the licenses in place before you bring them into the Shanghai Free Trade Zone. The second is, so you only need them when you bring in from the free trade zone into China. Then these things are controlled. The second thing is, usually the inspections are made at the moment you pass customs. Now in the Shanghai Free Trade Zone, you can bring your goods into the warehouse in Shanghai, ask the inspectors to come, and then bring it into China whenever you need them, and only then you pay the fees. So there are quite some simplifications there, which depending on your business model might worth considering. Yes. Now other cities will implement such free trade zones too in future, but that will take a while until these regulations are in place.
And how do you see the roles of like a free trade zone of this? Do you think this will help basically to relax a bit the situation for European SMEs, or how do you see that?
That's the idea. Whether it will work, we will see. But the idea is certainly to simplify the rules and to reduce cost at the end. And
for all the market participants.
Yes, and also to expedite the process.
I see. So since we are coming to the end, Klaus, I mean, to give a quick summary to the ones probably who have entered later, or to how to summarize a quite complex issue, what if you could say a couple of lines to sum up the whole topic?
First of all, as I mentioned, the system is different from Europe. Compulsory standards are the key to compliance, and compliance in China and Europe does not mean that you're compliant in China. I think these are the three key points. If you bring that, if you remember that, you also understood a lot about how to deal with China. The system requires expertise on the ground. As I say, internet will probably not help you too much. There are some good databases showing you in general what kind of rules apply, but at the end of the day you have to deal with the compulsory standards, and for these you will have to have some experts on the ground in China. Could that be your own staff, could be distributor or partner, business partner, or experts helping you with the process. The whole market access structure is time consuming, is costly, and can actually influence your supply chains, because sometimes it's just not doable or too complicated to do it a certain way, and then you just find other solutions. The impact is not only when you import, it can really impact the entire supply chain. If you pass by China, somewhere in the supply chain, these regulations will impact you. Also because different standards apply in China. Now, if you do registrations in China, that's probably my last advice. Think about who can do it and who should do it. The most simple way is basically your distributor tells you, I will take care of it, I will do it for you. That makes sense. It's a cheap way, a fast way for you to do it, and you don't have the responsibility. But if you want to change your distributor, then you start with zero, because then you have no market access. So the distributor holds the key to your market access in China. And if you stop the distributor, he will certainly not give you these licenses back, because they're also linked to him. So then you might have an interruption of, depends on the product, 2 months to 2 years if it's a medical device, where you just simply cannot sell anymore in China.
Okay.
So That's
Okay,
fine.
that's a good, how to say, that's a good end of quite an interesting topic. Thank you very much, Klaus, for how to say, outlining and sketching out a little bit about product conformity here in China. So besides webinars like the one of today, we have some upcoming other events which you can see here. The next one actually is the EUSME seminar series, the IT edition, which is taking place. I think now it's the 11th of September, so it's at the end of this week. Another important thing we currently are organizing is because there were food and beverage questions as well, is the World of Food here in Beijing, which will take place from November 18 to November 20 or 21. So we will have there a pavilion for small and medium-sized enterprises where you also can participate. You can get training and information from us here. There are many more you can see on this slide, and you can also check on the website. So I thank you very much for listening to all of this today. And I do think if we will end now very quickly, there will be a short questionnaire. We would be very grateful if you could answer this so that we can improve our topics and the way we perform. And so if you need further information, again, this is our website here, Get Ready for China. And I think I will leave the last words to Klaus, who looks at me.
Thank you. No, first of all, also thank you for listening to me. We have still a couple of questions which we didn't answer, but be assured we noted them all, and you will get within a few days a detailed response to those as well, either through the SME Center or I will respond to them. We will see that case to case. So if you have further questions, do not hesitate to call the SME Center or write to me directly.
Or send an email. Yeah. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.